Nobody ever had a worse father-in-law than our patriarch Jacob. And nobody ever had a worse uncle than our patriarch Jacob. And they were one and the same person, Laban. Jacob and Laban are introduced by Laban's daughter Rachel after Rachel and Jacob meet at the well. Love at first sight. Jacob is a refugee, having escaped the wrath of his brother Esau, who has good reason to want to kill him after some awful trickery on Jacob's part. Laban welcomes his nephew into his home, and Jacob goes to work taking care of Laban's sheep. Laban offers to pay him, asking Jacob what his wages should be. Jacob seeks no monetary salary, but instead that he be given Rachel's hand in marriage. Laban agrees that after 7 years' labor, Jacob may marry Rachel. In the meantime, Jacob lives in the household not only with Laban and Rachel, but also with Rachel's older sister, Leah. When the 7 years pass, Laban doesn't spontaneously hold up his end of the bargain. Jacob has to demand the time has come for him to marry Rachel. Laban seems to agree, and he throws a big wedding feast. Jacob then spends the night with his bride, only to awaken in the morning to discover that she is Leah, not Rachel. I have never believed this story. And I don't merely mean that it may not be an historical account of events that actually occurred. A good story has to be believable, and this one's implausible. How could Jacob spend the entire night with his first cousin, not the one he intends to marry, but her sister, with whom he has shared a home for 7 years, and fail to recognize the ruse until the next morning? The rabbis offer several explanations of how this subterfuge went unnoticed. In the 19th century, Rabbi Samuel David Luzzatto insisted that they had marital relations in the dark, and thus he did not recognize her until the morning. I'm not buying that. Even in the dark, Jacob would have known his partner. More plausibly, Tosafot, a 12th century commentary, posits that Laban throws a feast, in Hebrew, a mishteh, based on the verb to drink, with the goal of getting Jacob so drunk he doesn't know the difference between Leah and Rachel. A Talmudic theory is that Rachel and Jacob knew not to trust Laban, so they came up with a secret set of signals by which Rachel would identify her thickly veiled self to Jacob. When Rachel saw that her father was really going to do what she feared, though, she shared the signals with her sister, motivated by the desire to spare Leah the shame of being rejected under the chuppah. Now that's a lovely story about Rachel, but it doesn't really solve my problem. Veil or none, Jacob would have known the difference between the two sisters with whom he shared a home for 7 years. More than a few sages suggest that karma gets Jacob in the end. After all, he's the guy who put on sheepskin to deceive his father into giving him the blessing intended for Esau, his older brother. Now the trickster gets tricked. None of these explanations is my favorite, which can't be my original idea, though I find it in no traditional source. From the time that he first sees her on that wedding night, however thick the veil, Jacob knows that she's Leah, but he's trapped. Perhaps Rachel has taught Leah the secret code, which doesn't fool Jacob, but signals him that his beloved wants him to go along with the ruse. If he complains that he's been given the wrong sister in marriage, he will publicly shame Leah. Since the deception is her father's doing and not Leah's, she isn't to blame. Jacob keeps quiet to preserve his new wife's honor. Jacob is no longer the trickster who would stop at nothing to get what was rightfully his brother's, or even in this case his own. Instead, he has grown into a righteous person who values the feelings of another person more than getting his own way. The moral of the story is a complicated lesson about truth. Earlier in his life, Jacob disregards the truth, lying even to his father to achieve his goals. Now, by contrast, telling the whole truth, at least at first, in order to spare another person's feelings. We may imagine that honesty is always the best policy. As a student of Musar, though, I've learned that the truth, like all traits, exists on a spectrum. Some people tell too many lies, and other people tell the truth with little regard for others' feelings. The tradition teaches us to seek the golden path between lies, on the other hand, and being a brutal truth teller on the other. The great first century sages Hillel and Shammai famously debated the commandment to praise a bride. The rabbis, who were not concerned about sexism, wrangled over what to do if one does not see praiseworthy traits in the bride. In the words of Alan Marinas, Hillel states that all brides should be praised as being beautiful and gracious. To that Shammai retorts, what if a bride limps or is blind? Should one praise her as being beautiful and gracious? Has not the Torah told us, keep your distance from falsehood? Hillel answers with an analogy. When a person buys an inferior article in the market, should one praise it in their presence, or should one find fault with it in their presence? It appears to us that one should praise it. As Marinas admits, this analogy isn't one I'd personally try to defend, equating the bride to purchased merchandise. But still, Hillel is making a valid point about truth. Hillel tells us that we should not be primarily concerned with how our words correspond to verifiable reality, but rather for the impact our statement will have on another person. Far from being a stooge, when he doesn't immediately expose Leah, Jacob has found a new level of righteousness he did not possess as a younger man. Having once been a liar who would distort the truth to his own benefit, he now withholds the truth that would achieve his desires but harm another person, in this case Leah. And he receives a reward. After celebrating the full week of the bridal celebration with Leah, he marries his beloved Rachel too, one man being permitted multiple brides in Bible times. We too can strive for righteousness through truth. Let us, like the maturing Jacob, leave self-serving falsehood behind. At the same time, like Jacob, let us possess the wisdom to know when exposing the truth will hurt others. Then let us find balance in our lives, and may we, like Jacob, be known for righteousness. Amen.